Hello, BookTube. I saw recently my fellow member of the OGBG, the Old Geezers book group, Jason at Byways in Bookland, did a video about just a Tuesday reads, just a check-in to see how you're all doing and to tell you a bit about what's going on in his reading life. And I thought I would do the same. A note that he sounded in his video is something that I've heard from a number of different people, both booktubers and friends that I've met through BookTube, and also members of my own profession, people who review books either exclusively or a great part of their day, and that is not a reluctance, but a kind of just drifting towards old friends, towards reliable older works with a sort of a less adventurous, less willing, a lower willingness to go out and just dive into the endless piles of new releases that are out there. And I confess, I felt something of the same thing. As I've made clear on this channel over the years, my reading has mostly shifted in the last 7, 8, 10 years to new releases. That's most of what I read. And it's a broad spectrum of new releases. It's not just that I'm hungry for the latest science fiction or the latest contemporary romance or whatever. I read across a broad variety of genres, and because of that, a lot of the lacks that I would otherwise feel aren't there because the publishing industry supplies them. If I feel like a reread, well, I don't. Usually, in the normal course of things, I wouldn't necessarily need to go and reread something from a used bookstore. Instead, some publisher will send me a new edition of an older work, which kills two birds with one stone, because I get to examine that new edition and evaluate what kind of a job it does, but also revisit an older work. That has been part of what has just filled my reading, is new releases of all kinds, translated literature, reprints of older stuff, all kinds of genres. But I've noticed that I am not immune. that my own reading has drifted back towards more backstock reading, pointless pointless in terms of criticism, of just sort of yen-driven backstock reading. And I think part of that is the result of the fact that the pressure that I have felt for years now to stay just at level with new releases, to make sure that I am putting a representative dent in all the new releases that are coming out in all of the 20 genres that I read and love, that pressure has lessened quite a bit in the last few weeks as the onslaught of those books has stopped. It's easy to maintain a feeling of urgency towards new releases when you're getting 8 new releases in the mail every day, and that's not happening anymore. But that is wrong. To let that tension slack off is wrong, because the new releases are still out there. It's true that a lot of publishers are postponing publication dates. Why on earth? If you have control over these things, why on earth would you publish a book in April of 2020? Why would you do that? Not to say nothing of March, but let's say just April, even May, even June, but April of 2020, when bookstores are all closed and no one's going outside, when you can risk fines or imprisonment by going out on a frivolous errand like that? No. If you have control over your publishing schedule at this late date, and you have a book that was originally scheduled for April, like all the ones on that shelf that I have out in the other room, and you could change that pub date, you certainly would be advised to do that, no matter what the expense. Better the expense of changing that pub date and rearranging all sorts of readings and whatnot than to just eat the book, which is what you'll do. If you bring it out in April, you have to assume that your electronic sales will be a small fraction of what your physical sales would be, your printed sales. And maybe 2020 is the year that changes that. Maybe that is what will happen. I have, like a lot of people, I have lamented the direction that ebooks have taken in the last 6 or 7 years. I've lamented the fact that publishers have made them as expensive or more expensive than printed books when that makes no sense at all. I've lamented the fact that there's been no innovation, or almost no innovation, in them. I've lamented the fact that DRM agreements mean that you don't, in most cases, actually own the new book that you buy for that $30 online. You get a file that can be pulled from your machine at any moment. You don't own it. You're renting it. You're leasing it. I've lamented. It seems to me that mainstream American publishing, let's just concentrate on America for now, has made every wrong decision in the book when it comes to ebooks, and is now reaping the whirlwind, because this is a time when I think a lot of people would turn to ebooks as just a natural, safe alternative to any of this. If you're forbidden to go to the bookstore and you want to read a new book, well, it's still there. It still exists. You could download it. You already have an iPad. You already have a cell phone. You already have the means to do all this. And maybe some of the reluctance on readership's part, aside from the price gouging, was just that it was unusual. Well, necessity is the mother of changed habits, and maybe this would have been the chance for that to happen. But you would be crazy to spend $20 on an e-file of a book that you don't own. You'd be crazy to do that. When, there's technology for you to get an ebook from the library, that's the exact same thing on the exact same electronic device, and there you're not out any money. It's the publishing industry's own fault. But those books do still exist, and that tide is going to continue. And it would be a very bad idea. I'm giving myself a little leeway. Like a lot of people, I have been in shock. The sheer speed and size of this pandemic has put me in a little bit of shock. So I'm giving myself a little bit of leeway to ease off on the new releases while they're not piling up on my front porch. But I have to change that in April. I have to go right back to just subsuming myself in that world, or I'll regret it down the line. So, and also I miss it. I miss those books. But in the meantime, I thought I would take you through a little tour of some of the books that have been on my mind and that I've been reading lately. And you'll notice right away that it's not the usual just barrage of new and forthcoming titles. There have been new and forthcoming titles. There's one in particular today that I'm grappling with. It's by Barton Gellman, and it's Dark Mirror. It's a forthcoming book. Again, I don't know when. I think its pub date is in May. But if I were the publisher, I would change that if I could. I would not bring out a book in May. Absolutely not. There's a good chance that this pandemic will be cresting in May. There's a good chance that the whole country will be on one uniform lockdown in May. I'd like to think not. I'd like to hope not, but you never know. One way or another, sooner or later, Barton Gellman's book, Dark Mirror, about Edward Snowden, will come out. And I will be reviewing it when it comes out. And the subject fascinates me. This is an intelligence operative who betrayed the secrets of his profession, betrayed his country to let Americans know that the government is harvesting their data and spying on them without any let or lease at all. It was a bombshell revelation, and he is still in exile. He is still living in Russia because he's rightfully afraid that if he comes home to his home country, the country that he loves, he'll be thrown in jail and never see the light of day again. Just be thrown in jail and forgotten. He'll be given a military kangaroo court and be sentenced to life imprisonment. It's a testy subject, and Barton Gellman's book, Dark Mirror, which is the one that I'm grappling with today, is very good. It's very, very immediately readably written. And it has caused me to go back to all of my other Edward Snowden books. I have a few on ebooks. One that's really, really thought-provoking. It's called After Snowden. But then there's another one that I have in a printed book, Edward J. Epstein's book, How America Lost Its Secrets, which is a very negative look at Edward Snowden, a very negative look at everything that he did, a very negative look at how he himself has spun his story in the ensuing years. And boy, oh boy, the spinning of the story and the Edward Snowden, who is, ironically enough, a bit of a tyrant when it comes to the flow of information about himself, really comes out in Gellman's book. I think that just is all completely fascinating to me. But it's one of many books that I have just been downloading. I have myself made a lot of emphasis shift in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks to ebooks. And I'm wondering if the rest of you are the same way. Are you finding yourself reading more ebooks? Finding yourself a little bit more acclimated to them? But in addition to Edward Snowden, which is new and which is sort of on my mind for professional reasons, and it should be that in addition to that, there are dozens of other such new releases that are on my mind, but I confess lately I have been spending a lot more time with older books, and I thought I'd go through some of those with you. One of which we saw coming a mile away here when I did a tour of the TLS. The TLS, the Times Literary Supplement, will finish every issue with a piece from their archives, where they try to link it to something connected with some of the reviews that are already in the issue. But they picked something from years and years ago, and recently they did one on John Burroughs' review of The Yellow Admiral by Patrick O'Brien. And it was a pan of a review. It's a condescending, dumb, uncomprehending review of the type that I pulled it out and I will save it, but only to mock it, only as a cautionary tale. This is what a lazy, uninquisitive reviewer will do for a book. And of course, just as you knew it would, that sent me back to The Yellow Admiral to reread it with the criticisms of that review in mind. The review said that the book is all about its arcane vocabulary, and that is not true. You could change the vocabulary tomorrow, and it wouldn't change the emotional impact of the book. The reviewer in that stupid review said that the two main characters, Captain Jack Aubrey and his physician and spy master friend Stephen Matron, are 18th century supermen. They have no flaws. They're perfect at everything. That, of course, is not true. And this book shows it more clearly than any of than a few of the ones before it. And also, it definitely qualifies as going back to an old friend. I have been going back to old friends because the Patrick O'Brien, these seafaring novels absolutely will not disappoint. So I went back to that. But I've also been catching up on a backlog of science fiction periodicals, Astounding and Asimov's and Science Fiction and Fantasy. I get them every month, or I did, in print volumes at the bookstore, and I would read a couple of stories from one or two, and then something sometimes would draw me away. Sometimes I go right through the issue because I'd be so eager for science fiction, basically pulp short stories. Science fiction for me is synonymous with short stories. I grew up loving it because of that. Long before I read a science fiction novel, I was reading science fiction short stories in magazines just like these. But I didn't always finish every issue, and some issues just got lost in the pile. You know how that goes. And then I suddenly realized the other day that I don't know when I will buy these again in a newspaper, in print format, in a bookstore. I intentionally didn't subscribe to these things because they're struggling, and I wanted to give them the full cover price at a bookstore. And so they were among the handful of magazines that I didn't subscribe to, so that I would go every month to the bookstore. Well, I don't know when I'm going to be doing that again. I have no idea when the next issue of Asimov's or Analog I'll buy will be. So I've been burning through the ones that I have, and I'm making my way through the March-April issue of Analog, and I'm reading the cover story. That is a lovely illustration. The cover story is this, The House of Sticks by Derek Kunsken, and it is about a family of people who harvest materials in the cloud layers of Venus. And the father of the family has a dream of, as he tells his sons and his colleagues, he and his wife and their generation did not come to Venus merely to harvest metals from the atmosphere and make a deal with them for passing traders. They also came to explore new worlds, to see things that no one else had ever seen. And there is a quest in the course of this long novella. There's a quest on the part of this family to explore something on the surface of Venus. They don't usually go to the surface of Venus because it's so incredibly, crushingly hot and dangerous. They usually stay in the cloud layers, which are hot and dangerous enough as it is, but they're nowhere like as bad as the surface. And the House of Sticks is just amazing. It deserves to win every award that isn't nailed down. It's just an incredible, immersive story. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. As I've mentioned about Analog and Asimov's, every issue will give you at least one story like that just sets the small hairs on your neck standing up because it's just so good. Because it's just so good. Just a pure, great reading experience. At least once in every issue, that will happen. My own experience is that it happens at least 2 times. And sometimes more than that. I almost never read an issue of any of those three, fantasy and science fiction, analog, or Asimov's, and come away thinking, all right, none of the stories did at that time. That almost never happens. I can't remember the last time it did. Instead, every issue will have a thing like the House of Styx, with just an amazingly realized world without the padding of a novel. And just the type of thing that made me fall in love with science fiction. And it's not the end of this issue. Who knows what I'll encounter next? I savored the House of Styx. And that set me back to the e-bookstore, because it immediately, those you old science fiction fans will know right away. You'll be able to guess what I'm going to say. It made me want to read Venus of Dreams by Pamela Sargent, a fantastic science fiction novel from decades ago about terraforming Venus, about changing Venus and so that it's compatible with human life. It's not entirely impossible to do. Venus is basically a planet that is in the grip of millennia of out-of-control greenhouse gases. There are ways to leach that. There are ways to change that. It would take a long time, many generations. And Pamela Sargent's book, I think Venus of Dreams was the first book in a trilogy. But I, like everybody else, I read the mass market paperback with a fully outfitted astronaut on the surface of Venus decades and decades ago when it came out. And I don't think I ever read any of the other books in the series. And I don't have it. I don't have a mass market paperback of Venus of Dreams. That was a little search right here, and I didn't find it. But it turns out that it's available. And a few weeks ago, when I realized that bookstores were going to close, just that flat fact that bookstores were going to close, and that no one really knows when they'll reopen. This isn't a case where you can just say, well, enough is enough. You can't reopen a bookstore if you're going to kill everyone who walks in or endanger everyone who walks in. Can't ask your workers to go in under those circumstances. And no state in the country would be justified in letting that happen. They would say what Massachusetts, for instance, has said: this is non-essential. You are not allowed to be open. And you'll suffer the full weight of penalties for the state if you try it. And when I realized that a few weeks ago, that bookstores were going to be closed, for the first time in my life, I had that realization one day, and then like the next day or the day after that, I got a commission check, direct deposit, and not in the mail. It's only one of my many venues that actually sends physical checks anymore. I got a commission check in my direct deposit that I had forgotten about. That happens when you do lots and lots of freelance work, especially when you do it quickly. I'm a fast freelance worker. When you do it quickly, sometimes you'll just forget, and people are often dilatory in paying, and so sometimes you'll get a check that literally seems to just come out of the blue, and that happened with me. A nice, sturdy little check came out of the blue, and a few weeks ago it came right after I'd realized that I wouldn't be free to go into bookstores anymore, used or new. And I took that money, the whole sum of it, and put it aside in a separate account just for online books, just for buying books online, whether it's physical copies from people that are still delivering them or whether it's e-copies. But I mainly had in mind e-copies of books, just a separate account for that, to make it easier, to make it mentally easier for me. And the Venus of Dreams was one of the first beneficiaries of that, but there'll be others. I'm not gonna hesitate anymore. I'm not gonna look at these things and say, well, I prefer the printed book, so I'll just wait, because I don't know how long I'll be waiting. No, so I'm not going to do that. So House of Styx led me to Venus of Dreams, and a bad review in the TLS from the archives selection led me to The Yellow Admiral. The next book that I want to show you, nothing led me to it except Frida. Frida and I were out for a walk, and we came across one of those little free libraries, a little box. I'm sure you have them wherever you are, even outside of America. It's just a bunch of books, and the person who sets up the little free library replenishes it from time to time. I really, really wish that I had one of those. I wish that I had taken the time or bother, I don't know how much bother it would be, to set up one of those at the end of the driveway. Because boy, oh boy, could I stock it. I could keep this whole neighborhood supplied in books, new and old, forever. And it wouldn't be a lot of times little free libraries. You'll open them up, you'll pass one on your walk, and you'll open it up, and it'll be a depressing sight because the books will all be moth-eaten and drenched with rain and whatnot, because no one's changed them in forever. I could change mine every day, or every week at least, and that would be a lot of fun, I think. But I found a book. Whenever Frida and I were out on our walks up in the neighborhoods of these little picturesque streets, if we pass a little free library, I always look. You can never have too many books. And I found a copy of a book that I actually have. I have it here already, but this is so much nicer a copy. This thing's brand new. This is Henry Mayer. This is All on Fire, his biography of William Lloyd Garrison, the great abolitionist, the great American abolitionist. That is him right there with his bug eyes and his big brain. This is just an absolutely terrific biography, as you can tell from the cover blurb by Benjamin Schwartz, who's no mean judge of great books. And when we were doing my biography tour last year, in my library tour in 2019, you saw a copy of this, but I had already repaired it, and it was still stained, and it had a couple of writings in it. This is just brand new. I don't know what it was doing in that little free library, but it was a treat to reread it. I haven't reread the book in so long. And then the last two things I want to show you here in this admittedly rambling Tuesday check-in. The first one is a comic book. Comic book stores are also closed. And not only are comic book stores closed, but Diamond Distributors, which gets comics to your comic book store, has shuttered its business. It's firing people, laying people off. The owner of Diamond Distributors says that it's only temporary, but I doubt it. I very much doubt it. I don't know that the superhero comic book industry is going to survive. Marvel and DC Comics, the two main publishers of superhero comics, are making various noises about doing digital first comics every Wednesday so that people can still at least have their comics in a digital form, or maybe trying to create from scratch some alternate physical distribution route other than Diamond. I don't have much hope for either one of those choices, because it's been my experience that most comic book fans, the ones who will actually pay money every week for comics, don't want digital. They want a printed thing that they can hold and bag and put in boxes and collect and revisit. And also, it doesn't really make a difference whether or not you come up with an alternate means to deliver your comics to comic book shops if comic book shops are closed. And they are. You can't have your comic book store open pretty much anywhere in America these days. And most of those little comic book stores, the Diamond Distributors, the reason it exists is because comics are direct distribution. They are distributed to specialty stores, comic shops. That's why you don't see them in most bookstores. That's why you don't see them at drugstores anymore, anything like that. And most comic shops, most specialty comic shops, don't have the financial wherewithal to survive without comics, without foot traffic, with their premises closed. So I would imagine that even when that changes, even when, God willing, somewhere down the line in the summer or the fall, things have turned enough of a corner for shops like comic shops to open up again, I don't think most of them will survive. I think most of them will be gone. I don't know how much that will be true for instance, a big chain store like my own. Newbury Comics might have cash reserves to survive. I don't know, one way or another. But right before the darkness closed in, right before the curtain fell, in fact, the last day, I think, that Newbury Comics was open for business, I got this. I got Robin, 80th anniversary, a big square-bound $10, I think this was $10 full-color comic celebrating the 80th anniversary of Robin the Boy Wonder, and taking you through all of his incarnations with a whole bunch of great artists. Tom Grummett does the first one. Scott McDaniel, who's one of the great Batman artists of all time, in my opinion, did Nightwing. He did years of the comic book adventures of the first Robin, Dick Grayson, grown up and became a different superhero named Nightwing. And Scott McDaniel drew those issues, and they are amazing, just incredible. That is his artwork. Just the way he does panel work is just nobody's like it. You can tell in a minute. But this issue takes people through all the different incarnations of Robin, all the people who have been Robin. The Tim Drake, for instance, and the the Robin who gets beaten to death by the Joker and whatnot. And it was wonderful, just wonderful. I've always had a kind of weird fascination with the fact that one of DC's marquee heroes is not only has no superpowers but is a boy and not even a full-grown adult. That's always fascinated me. I remember think there used to be a cartoon on TV called Super Friends. And the core roster of superheroes there was Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Batman, and Robin. And I remember watching that. I loved it. I absolutely loved Super Friends. I had no idea what was coming. I had no idea special effects or CGI or great animation. No idea that Justice League, the cartoon, would come along 40 years later. But I remember watching that and thinking, yeah, the thing that confuses me here is not Super Friends' decision. It's DC Comics' decision. Why isn't Robin a member of the Justice League? If Batman is, why isn't Robin? Why aren't Batman and Robin members of the Justice League instead of just Batman? I always found that absolutely fascinating. It's unusual for DC to do, I think. And so whenever there's a retrospective, whenever something comes along, a big volume or commemorative omnibus or whatever of this character through the ages, I love to get it and look through it. We've seen a couple on this channel. And so I got this thing and really, really, really enjoyed it. Just enjoyed. Some of these incarnations of Robin are a lot more appealing to me than others. Some of them I know a lot better than others, but I had a blast. And when I finished this thing, it drove me to this. It drove me to All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder by Frank Miller and Jim Lee. Now, Jim Lee is currently the publisher of DC Comics, so he is captain of the Titanic. And Frank Miller, of course, needs no introduction. He is a legend in the comic book world, did Batman Dark Knight and a bunch of other stuff. And in this thing is drawn by Jim Lee. Just fantastic artwork by Jim Lee and written by Frank Miller. And a large part of it is this first arc is about Robin. It's about Dick Grayson. It's about his origin story and his entry into his introduction to Batman. And you get here's the classic panel. I don't know if you can read that line. I'm not going to read it out loud, but Dick Grayson asks, who are you to do all this? And Batman gives him an answer. That became sort of emblematic of this whole run. I love it. I don't view it as canon, but I absolutely love it. This is Frank Miller retrofitting Batman Dark Knight Returns, which is the big graphic novel that he did of an alternate Batman from 20 years in the future who is in his late 50s and comes back out of retirement to fight crime one last time. And that Dark Knight Returns is justly revered as a great graphic novel. And this is sort of Frank Miller continuing to flesh in the past of that Batman. He did it in Batman Year One, which is another great thing that he did, where he wrote it, but he didn't draw it. David Mazzucchelli drew it. And this is more of the same. For instance, this would be almost Batman Year Two, where you're following the story of that character, but who is eventually going to become the Batman of Dark Knight Returns. And it was the Robin anniversary that led me to this, and I just loved it. I just poured through it all over again. So there you go. Sorry about that. Very rambly, very Jason-esque Tuesday reads. Just give you an idea of the kinds of things that I'm reading at the moment. I am going to swing around. This was a fun, and I think probably a psychically necessary diversion into just reading at will, reading old stuff, reading randomly, reading for pleasure, purely for pleasure. I am going to have to arrest that. It would be foolish not to. So in April, I will move back to mostly new releases, and we'll let the chips fall where they may in terms of when those books will appear. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.